This is a practice of rhythm, including dotted quarter note, usually accompanied by immediately by an eighth note. So when you have a dotted quarter note and then an eighth note, you know that the total is 2 beats in a 3/4, 4/4, or 2/4, and the time signature with a 4 at the bottom. So the total of this is 2 beats, because then you add it to the 1 beat and it makes 3 beats, which is your time signature 3/4. So if it occupies 2 beats, and in this case, it's falling on the second beat because your first beat is already taken by this quarter note. So the second beat falls right here. When you say 2, you actually play this note. And imagine that there's a time passing by. So if you say 2, you play this note. At the second number 3, it falls right there in the middle, because within 2 to 3, it's only 1 beat. But this dotted quarter note is half a beat more. So at the middle of the beat number 3 is when you're actually playing this note. In the middle, most people would teach you to say and, right? So we're saying
Yes.
and here. And as we're saying and, we're playing that note, that eighth note. And that's why it's a little tight on my screen, but I want you to understand that it's only on the and that you're actually making this sound. Okay, same thing with writing the beat count for the next bar. So 1 would be when you play that note, and 2 would be when you play that note, and 3 would be when you play that note, correct? But in between, you know that this note again falls in between the beat 1 and 2, so we say and for that one, and we also say and for this one. So does that mean I don't count the N here and here and here? No, you can. You can. In fact, I do recognize that for some people, it is best if you just say N the whole way through. So when you have a piece that has eighth notes, either alone like this or in pairs, you always should be saying 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and etc. And keep saying it. And then kind of knowing where to play the note. So let's do this first exercise, line C. So you have a few answers there, but I'm hoping that you understand and that you'll be able to just keep on going with these other bars here that we have not written for. So we're in 3/4, therefore we only count 3 beats, and we're going to count all the ands in between. Okay, here we go. At 55. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 that's, you realize 55, that's slower than a second. A second is 60, and it's still way too fast. Probably, if you're coming from low, beginners class, I would then go at 40. Let's do that again. And if 40 is your speed, please practice at 40 and practice much more than what we do in class, because you need to be able to read your own rhythm in the song. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and. So write down for yourself your own speed. At what skill are you at in terms of like doing this rhythm? This is the bass. This is for low intermediate, like the bass. And you do have to practice a lot before you get into a song. And instead of doing it by ear, which most of you do, you are actually reading the rhythm, okay? So we're going to do the same compromise between the 40 and the 55. Let's do it at 45 for this line D. Here is 45. So listen to it and count first before you start. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2. See, it takes me time to get used to the speed and counting correctly before I actually start playing. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 that's 45. So write it down for yourself which speed is good for you. When it gets to a 2/4 time signature, it goes by even faster because now you're only counting to 3. You're only counting to 2 now because you only have 2/4. There's only 2 beats. So the second beat would fall here. Of course, that is easy, right? So the second beats fall with that note. And the second beat falls with that note. And this we end counting. And of course, it goes without saying, I will be counting all the and in between we call that subdividing. When you're counting and you're subdividing constantly, at some point, you don't have to say it out loud anymore. The subdivision will be in your head. Okay, but for the moment, beginners, do subdivide. So let's do it at 40 because it's a new, and let's count a few bars of 1 and 2 and first to get used to our speed. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Here we go. 1 and 2 and 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 that is 40. Let's try the second line at 45. 1 and 2. Here we go. 1 and 2 and 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 that's too fast for you. Go back to 40. And it's by practicing this that we get better. So let's do 2 more lines. Let me erase that. Let's do this line. So again, I'm going to count now the and really soft so that you have more of a sense of the beat. 1, 2, 1, 2, right? So the 1 falls here, the 2 falls here, the 1 falls here, the 2 falls here, etc. And then you notice, oh yeah, what is that one? This one, right, doesn't fall with any note. And every time I have a dotted quarter note, that's how it falls. We're continuing with 45. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Here we go. 1 and 2 and 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 1 2 and 1 2 1 2. That's 45. And finally, the bottom line, this one. Again, we're counting in 1 or 2. Okay, 1 is here, 2 is here, 1 is here, 2 is on the rest, etc. Here we go. 1 and 2. Here we go. 1, 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, and 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. And that's those last 2 lines I practiced with a very soft N. Only do that if you're really very comfortable with saying the N out loud.